And of course, we come to Romans 8. This is one of the parts of it that tends to be either very unsettling to people or very reassuring to people. This idea that God has predestined us. Those he predestined, he called, and those he called, he justified. What is predestination?
This, too, like many other questions, goes back to the Middle Ages. It goes back to St. Augustine before that, and then Aquinas and so on. And the reformers, Luther and Calvin, adjusted some of the bells and whistles with Augustine and Aquinas, but it's still the same thing because they're still reading Romans 8:12-30 as though it's about how I get to heaven. And the bit you missed out at the end there is those he justified, them he also glorified.
Right.
And we have read glorified as meaning going to glory, i.e. going to heaven. But actually, and this again, my friend Haley Goranson Jacob argued this very strongly in her dissertation, that glorified throughout that passage in Romans isn't about the final destination, which shouldn't in any case be heaven by itself. It should be the new heavens and the new earth. But the glorification comes from Psalm 8. And in Psalm 8, it's about the human vocation. You have made us a little lower than the angels to crown us with glory and honor, putting all things in subjection under our feet. In other words, glorification is about people becoming genuinely human at last, which means being put in authority over God's world. It also, by the way, has to do with God coming back in glory as he'd always promised, so that the arrival of the Spirit in people's lives is itself the fulfillment of the Old Testament hope of God's glory and the thing which generates and sustains the glory which was always intended for human beings, i.e. responsible stewardship over God's world. So that's what this passage is about. This passage is about God's purpose to put the world right through human beings. Who is the human being through whom the world is put right? Jesus, of course. That's why that very same passage, Paul says, we are to be conformed to the image of the Son. We are reflecting God into the world. And that's what God has called us in order to do.